Okay, let's get started. One thing that I really wanted to stress in this class was that you don't always need to be fancy with this beautiful watercolor paper and these brush pens that may or may not be kind of tough to control at times. I wanted to show that just drawing on basic printer paper with a very simple marker, it could be a Sharpie or a small felt tip pen that costs $1 at the dollar store is a viable way to work and can be really fun. And I deliberately choose to work that way sometimes because you just kind of get sick of the same thing all the time. So I wanted to start with a tier one sort of sketch or demo that just shows if people want to be more simple with their approach and keep things on the lower budget side and just forgetting about budget just on the simpler side, this would be the way to go. So we've gone over the list of materials and kind of I'm using these thin felt tip pens and there's so many of them on the market that you can just kind of buy 3 or 4 different ones and try them out, see which ones have the right feel. And again, I stress that it is about the right feel on the right surface. So depending on the paper you're using, I wouldn't recommend drawing with one of these things on a super textury watercolor paper, or if you are using it just for a quick lay-in, because if you do, it's going to chew up that tip and it's going to be destroyed almost immediately. So that is one thing that is worth noting. On top of that, the style that you're choosing sort of also matters when it comes to this sort of stuff. And in this case, I'm going to be checking out a very simple sketch of a simple shape that has black shadows. So I'm just going for scribbling in solid darks. We're not doing any rendering. We're not doing any gradients, nothing like that. So as you can see, I chose this kind of iconic shape of a traditional kind of colonial style architecture of some sort. A-frame, windows with mullions, little eaves and extended eaves and the mullions in the windows, traditional. Could be a lot of different places, but you'll find a lot of reference for this type of architecture out there. And I can't get enough of it personally. I just love the way that the shapes are divided up. So beyond that, you can kind of add your own touches to, the peak of the roof could be taller or the chimney could be longer or things like that. But essentially, I'm keeping the perspective very simple. I want people to see how simple this process can be. And to, again, as I keep saying, to demystify the process of drawing architecture. When you really take it step by step and look at the simplest aspects of what a building is, you can really break it all the way down to a cube. So I know that it doesn't always make sense right away, but if you can draw a cube in perspective, then you can draw buildings. It's just about how many cubes compounded on top of each other you're willing to do. And there are parts that you can kind of give yourself a break on, which I'm showing how there's another little kind of ventilation chimney piece that is solid black, like a silhouette in the back part. Using that, the simplification of shadow as a kind of an advantage of a way to essentially get out of having to draw every single little detail. It's not really what it's about. It's about capturing the character and the personality of one small building, right? So that's kind of what we're trying to do here. Looking at a city, looking at a collection of buildings has a lot more complexity to it. But when you look at one single individual building, you can kind of break down its anatomy a little bit more and its personality a little bit more, in my opinion. So this is kind of the basic idea here is looking at a building as a character, really trying to identify, hear me talk about personality and character and recognizability and memorability. And these kind of things all really do matter when it comes to architecture, because similar to vehicles, architecture almost has a face to it. It almost has at least good architecture generally has a kind of a face and a personality to it. When you stare at it long enough, you feel like it makes you feel a certain way. And really what it is 3-dimensional graphic design. If you think about it, there's function to architecture, but then why not every house look exactly the same? That is because different cultures, different parts of the world, different time periods they've chosen a different graphic design style for the shape of the buildings, the shape breakup. For example, this kind of barn shape roof that you'll see, this pentagonal, 5-sided shape that you see, these barn sort of looking shapes. A lot of times there'll be like a very small square window, just one little small square window at the top, which has a very distinct look to it, of this kind of Western barn flavor. And of course, you'll find in America, you'll find out that, that comes from the Dutch, or that comes from, some type of a European culture that uses that style traditionally. And so these are just ways to trace back where that graphic design comes from. So I feel like there's just to recap a couple of the main points here: capturing the big shape, drawing simple perspective, essentially a cube in some kind of perspective that is bent, that is warped, that is multiple sided, that is, instead of being 4-sided, it's 5-sided, or whatever the case may be. And then you have the aspect of 3-dimensional graphic design. So it is a 2-dimensional shape that now has depth to it. We talked about the idea of simplifying graphic shadows and using it to give yourself a break, so you don't have to give every little thing attention, line work, and spell out every single contour. That sometimes gets boring and it doesn't look as cool. So I'm using that idea of 3-dimensional graphic design to break things up even further. I think this is a really fun way to draw. So I figured that the first demo of this chapter would be about showing what can be fun about drawing a small building, for example, but also just to give yourself a break, an easier way into more difficult subject matter. I would recommend, if this is still challenging, to give it something a little bit of depth like this. And there's minimal perspective here, very little. Then I would repeat this process, find other references that are understandable to you, that you can use to look at, and keep doing this. And once you get this to being fun, right? It doesn't have to be the easiest thing. Once it's fun, you can move on from there. And as you can see here, my final sketch, I added a little bit of other stuff to it to just ground it a little bit more. But this is the simplest that I feel you need to start. Very minimal perspective, and a really kind of friendly approach to this. Certainly, I didn't want it to feel boring, like this is the lowest common denominator of drawing buildings. In my opinion, far from it. But I do feel that the best way to start is to find the subject matter that you feel like you have a decent understanding of. And I'll say this in literally every one of these courses and every chapter, for the most part, if you're trying to break down a subject matter, you need to understand it first. So simpler is better. Give yourself a little bit of a challenge, but you want to start in a fairly familiar territory and kind of build from there. This is a very fun technique to me. And honestly, even though I'm pitching this to you as the entry level tier 1 sort of performance level, I still think this is just as fun. It doesn't really ever get less fun. You can do this with a Sharpie on a napkin, or you can do this with a gorgeous Japanese brush pen that is, expensive and on a really nice piece of paper. You can do this in either one of those settings, and it really will be just as fun for you. So that's kind of where we're at on this one. I hope this was informative, but give it a shot. Yeah. Make sure that you start simple, and you'll have a lot more fun with this exercise.